What would you do if the door to your dreams slammed shut in your face, not because you weren't qualified, not because you didn't have the skills, but simply because of who you are? Would you walk away? Would you accept it as the way things are? Or would you build your own door? This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a man who was told he didn't belong in an industry he loved, who faced rejection after rejection, not for lack of talent, but for the color of his skin. And what he did next didn't just change his life. It changed the lives of hundreds of people who'd been told the exact same thing. Marcus grew up in Southside Chicago, in a neighborhood where opportunity wasn't something that knocked on your door. You had to chase it down the street, around corners, through alleys. His mother worked 2 jobs, his father had left when he was 6, and his older brother had fallen into the streets by the time Marcus was 12. But Marcus was different. Not better, just different. While his friends were learning the corners, Marcus was learning code. He'd found an old desktop computer at a yard sale when he was 14. $50. It barely worked, but it worked enough. He taught himself HTML from library books, then JavaScript, then Python. By the time he was 18, he could build a website from scratch, create mobile apps, debug systems that seasoned developers struggled with. He wasn't just good, he was exceptional. His high school counselor told him to be realistic. "Kids from this neighborhood don't go into tech," she'd said, not unkindly, but with the kind of finality that suggested she'd given this speech before. "Have you thought about trade school? Or maybe community college?" But Marcus had already been accepted to a state university on a partial scholarship. He worked nights at a warehouse, weekends at a grocery store, and somehow still maintained a 3.8 GPA in computer science. He graduated in 4 years with honors, tens of thousands in student debt, and a portfolio that would make any recruiter take notice. At least that's what he thought. The morning of his first real interview, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror in his one good suit, a navy blue number from a discount store that he'd had tailored at a neighborhood shop. It fit him perfectly. His resume was printed on quality paper, his portfolio was loaded on a tablet, and his mind was sharp. He'd practiced common interview questions with his roommate for weeks. He was ready. He didn't know that ready wouldn't be enough. As he rode the train downtown, watching the city transform from worn brownstones to gleaming high-rises, Marcus allowed himself to imagine. The position was for a junior developer at a mid-sized tech firm called Innovatech Solutions. It wasn't Google or Apple, but it was a foot in the door. From there he could climb. From there, everything was possible. But there was something in the air that morning, something he couldn't quite name. A tension. A static. The kind of feeling you get right before a storm breaks. The Innovatech offices were on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, as his mother had always taught him. "Colored folks gotta be twice as good and 3 times as punctual," she'd say. It was a lesson born from experience, from a lifetime of knowing that the playing field wasn't level and never had been. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a waterfall feature that probably cost more than his mother made in a year. Marcus gave his name to the receptionist, a young white woman with perfect teeth who smiled professionally and directed him to the elevator. The elevator ride up felt longer than it should have. Marcus checked his reflection in the mirrored walls, adjusted his tie, took a deep breath. "You've got this," he told himself. "You've worked for this." The office space was open concept, all modern furniture and motivational posters about innovation and disruption. Young professionals in casual Friday attire, though it was Tuesday, typed away at standing desks or clustered around whiteboards covered in diagrams and code. Marcus noticed immediately that he was the only black person visible on the floor. He'd noticed this before, of course. In his university classes, he'd often been one of maybe 2 or 3 black students out of 30. He'd learned to navigate those spaces, to code switch when necessary, to make himself palatable, approachable, non-threatening. It was exhausting, but it was survival. Marcus Thompson? A man in his 40s approached, extending a hand. He was tall, graying at the temples, wearing expensive jeans and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up. "I'm Richard Brennan, VP of Engineering. Thanks for coming in." The handshake was firm but brief. Marcus noticed the way Richard's eyes traveled, quickly, almost imperceptibly, from Marcus's face to his suit to his shoes and back again. It was an assessment, a sizing up. Marcus had seen that look before, but he pushed the thought aside. "Thank you for the opportunity," Marcus replied, his voice steady, professional. "I'm excited to learn more about the position." They walked through the office toward a conference room. Marcus could feel eyes on him. Some curious, some indifferent, a few that seemed to linger with something else, something that made his shoulders tense. In the conference room, 2 other people waited. Karen Masterson, the HR director, a woman in her 50s with carefully styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And Tyler Chin, a senior developer who looked barely older than Marcus, with headphones around his neck and an expression of mild boredom. The interview started normally enough. They asked about his education, his technical skills, his experience with various programming languages. Marcus answered confidently, even enthusiastically. This was his element. When they gave him a coding challenge, a problem involving algorithm optimization, he solved it in under 10 minutes, explaining his thought process clearly. Tyler's eyebrows raised slightly. That was the first genuine reaction Marcus had gotten. But then the question shifted. So Marcus, Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Tell me about cultural fit. How do you see yourself integrating into our team environment here? It was a standard question, but something about the way he asked it felt loaded. I'm a team player, Marcus responded. In college, I worked on several group projects where collaboration was key. I'm comfortable giving and receiving feedback, and I believe diverse perspectives make for stronger solutions. Diverse perspectives, Richard repeated, nodding slowly. Sure. But you understand that in a fast-paced environment like ours, there's a certain professional standard, a way things are done. Marcus felt the first flutter of unease in his stomach. Of course, I'm adaptable and quick to learn company culture. Karen jumped in, her voice saccharine. It's just that we've found over the years that certain candidates, despite their qualifications on paper, sometimes struggle to mesh with the existing team dynamic. You understand? No, Marcus wanted to say, I don't understand. Say what you mean. But instead he smiled. I'm confident I can be an asset to your team. My portfolio demonstrates not just technical skill but also creativity and problem-solving ability. Your portfolio is interesting, Richard said, and there was something in that pause that felt deliberate. But portfolio work and actual job performance in our environment are two different things. We need people who can hit the ground running, who already understand the professional expectations of corporate tech culture. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't said much during the interview, but now he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I spent last summer interning at a startup, Marcus offered. I worked in a professional development environment and received excellent reviews from my supervisor. I can provide references. A startup, Richard interrupted, not unkindly but dismissively. That's quite different from what we do here. Startups are casual. We're a serious operation. The conversation continued, but Marcus could feel it slipping away. Every answer he gave was met with subtle skepticism. Every qualification was countered with some vague concern about fit, or culture, or professional standards, terms that meant nothing and everything all at once. When they asked if he had any questions, Marcus asked about professional development opportunities, about the team structure, about projects they were excited about. Good questions. Smart questions. Richard answered in generalities, his attention already somewhere else. Karen checked her phone. The interview that was supposed to last an hour ended in 35 minutes. We'll be in touch, Richard said, standing and extending his hand once more. The handshake was even briefer this time. Marcus gathered his things, thanked them for their time, and turned to leave. As he reached for the conference room door, Karen's voice stopped him. Oh, Marcus? One more thing. He turned back, a small flicker of hope igniting. Maybe he'd read the room wrong. Maybe. We like to be transparent in our process, she said, her hands folded neatly on the table. And I think it's only fair to tell you that while your technical skills are adequate, we're looking for someone who's a better match for our company culture. Someone who fits the Innovatech image. The image. Those two words hung in the air like smoke. I see, Marcus said slowly. And what exactly is the Innovatech image? Richard cleared his throat. Professional. Polished. Someone our clients can relate to when we bring team members to meetings. You have to understand, Marcus, we work with Fortune 500 companies, conservative industries. Banking, finance, healthcare. They have certain expectations. Expectations? Marcus repeated, his jaw tight. We're just being honest, Karen added, as if honesty softened the blow. It's nothing personal. It's just business reality. Tyler was staring at his laptop screen, his face flushed. Marcus felt heat rising from his chest to his neck to his face. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not so blatantly. So let me make sure I understand, Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. My technical skills are adequate, your word, not mine, but I'm not being considered because I don't fit your image. An image that relates to conservative corporate clients. Now don't put words in my mouth, Richard started. What word should I use? Marcus interrupted, something breaking loose inside him. Help me understand what you're actually saying. Because it sounds like you're telling me that despite my qualifications, despite my degree, despite solving your coding challenge faster than you probably expected, I'm not the right fit because of how I look. The room went silent. Karen's smile had vanished. Richard's expression hardened. I think you're reading into this, Karen began. Am I? Marcus's voice rose slightly. He couldn't stop it now, couldn't swallow it down. You said, people like you might struggle with your team dynamic. You questioned whether I understand professional standards. You're concerned about your corporate image. Tell me what exactly about me doesn't fit. My resume? My portfolio? Or is it something else? Something you can't quite say out loud in a recorded interview? Young man, Richard stood, his voice cold now. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This kind of attitude is exactly why we have concerns about cultural fit. This attitude? Marcus felt something crack inside him. You mean the attitude of someone calling out discrimination when he sees it? Discrimination, Richard scoffed. You millennials throw that word around so easily. We simply don't think you're right for the position. That's not discrimination, that's business judgment. Based on what? What specifically disqualifies me? We don't owe you an explanation, Karen said sharply, standing as well. We've been more than courteous. Now please leave before we have to call security. The threat hung in the air. Security? As if he was a danger. As if he was the problem. Marcus looked at Tyler, who was still staring at his laptop, refusing to make eye contact. No ally there. He looked back at Richard and Karen, at their closed faces, their crossed arms, their absolute certainty that they were in the right. He wanted to say more. He wanted to rage, to demand justice, to make them admit what they were really saying. But he was outnumbered, on their territory, and the threat of security being called on a black man in a corporate office wasn't empty, it was dangerous. I don't need you to call security, Marcus said, his voice tight. I know my way out. He walked through the office with his head up, even though he felt every eye on him. The young professionals at their standing desks, the clusters of people by the coffee station, all watching the black man in the too nice suit walking the walk of shame toward the elevator. The elevator doors couldn't close fast enough. When they finally did, Marcus leaned against the mirrored wall and closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding. And underneath the anger, underneath the humiliation, was something worse. A familiar, crushing weight of knowing that this wasn't new, wasn't surprising, wasn't even the first time. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How'd it go, baby? He couldn't answer. Not yet. The elevator opened to the lobby. Marcus walked past the receptionist with the perfect teeth, past the expensive waterfall, out into the Chicago afternoon where the spring air felt too bright, too normal for what had just happened. He made it 2 blocks before he had to stop, ducking into an alley between buildings, pressing his palms against the cool brick wall, trying to breathe through the rage and shame and bitter disappointment flooding his system. This was supposed to be it. His break. His chance. Instead, it was another door slammed in his face. Another voice telling him he didn't belong. And the worst part? The part that made his chest tight and his eyes burn? It wouldn't be the last. Marcus didn't go home right away. He couldn't face his small apartment, his roommate's inevitable questions, the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. Instead, he walked. Block after block through downtown Chicago, past office buildings full of people with jobs, past restaurants where the lunch crowd spilled out onto patios, past everything that had seemed possible just hours before. He ended up at Millennium Park, sitting on a bench near the Bean, watching tourists take selfies in the sculpture's reflection. They looked happy, carefree, like their dreams weren't being systematically crushed by invisible barriers they couldn't name but always felt. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his friend Devin, someone he'd met in college who'd graduated a year before him. Yo, how'd the interview go? Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. They told me I wasn't the right fit. The response came quickly. Man, that's the 3rd one this month. What did they say? Marcus's fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could he say? How could he explain the looks, the tone, the coded language that meant everything and nothing? How could he prove what he knew in his bones to be true? They said I didn't match their company image. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, that's some bullshit. You know that's code, right? Yeah, I know. You want to grab a drink? I'm off at 6. Marcus considered it, but the thought of sitting in a bar, rehashing the humiliation, trying to explain to another black man something they both already understood too well, it was exhausting. Maybe tomorrow. I need to think. He stayed on that bench until the sun started to set, until the tourists thinned out and the joggers appeared for their evening runs. And somewhere in those hours of sitting, of watching, of feeling the weight of every rejection and microaggression and coded phrase accumulate, something shifted. The anger didn't go away, but it changed. It crystallized into something sharper, something with purpose. He thought about his mother working 2 jobs so he could go to college. He thought about the hours he'd spent teaching himself to code, the sleepless nights perfecting his craft, the debt he'd taken on believing that talent and hard work would be enough. He thought about all the other Marcus Thompsons out there, brilliant and qualified and ready, who were being told the same thing, "You don't fit our image." And he thought, what if I created a different image? The idea came slowly at first, then all at once. What if he didn't keep knocking on doors that would never open? What if he built his own company? A place where people like him weren't the problem, they were the solution. It seemed impossible. He had student debt, no investors, no connections in the tech world beyond his classmates. But then again, hadn't everyone told him college was impossible too? Hadn't they said a kid from Southside Chicago had no business dreaming of a tech career? He'd proved them wrong before. He could do it again. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a new note. He titled it, TechForward, a company for everyone they said didn't fit. Then he started typing. Over the next week, Marcus worked like he'd never worked before. He used the coding skills that Innovatech had called adequate to build a prototype for a project management platform specifically designed for small to medium-sized businesses that couldn't afford the big corporate solutions. He reached out to Devin and 2 other friends from college, Jasmine, a talented UX designer, and Ahmad, a marketing major who understood social media better than anyone Marcus knew. They met at a coffee shop on the south side. The 4 of them crowded around a small table with their laptops and notebooks and dreams. "So let me get this straight," Jasmine said, stirring her 3rd coffee of the meeting. "You want to start a tech company specifically to hire people that other companies won't hire?" "Not won't hire," Marcus corrected. "People they don't think fit their image. People of color, people from non-traditional backgrounds, people who taught themselves to code instead of going to Stanford or MIT. People with talent that's being ignored because of where they're from or what they look like." "That's ambitious," Ahmad said, but he was smiling. "Also probably necessary. You know how many qualified people I know who can't get past the resume screening?" "Exactly," Marcus leaned forward. "And here's the thing, we're not going to be a charity case. We're going to be competitive, innovative, better than the companies that rejected us. We're going to prove that diverse teams aren't just feel-good diversity hires, they're better at solving problems because they bring different perspectives." Devin nodded slowly. "You know this is going to be hard, right? Like impossibly hard. We don't have capital. We don't have connections. The tech world is a boys' club and we're not the boys they're looking for." "I know," Marcus said, "but I'm done asking for permission to exist in spaces that don't want me. I'm going to create our own space." There was a moment of silence around the table. Then Jasmine raised her coffee cup. "To TechForward," she said. "To building something they can't ignore." They clinked their cups together, for young people with more ambition than resources, more hope than sense, about to take on an industry that had already told them no. The first 6 months were brutal. They worked out of Marcus's apartment, coding through the night, surviving on ramen and coffee and sheer determination. Devin kept his day job to pay rent. Jasmine freelanced on the side. Ahmad did social media consulting. Marcus burned through his meager savings and maxed out 2 credit cards. But slowly, painfully, TechForward began to take shape. They built their project management platform, sleek, intuitive, affordable. They beta tested it with small businesses in their neighborhood, refining based on feedback. And they started hiring. Not people with fancy degrees or corporate pedigrees, but talented individuals who'd been overlooked. A self-taught programmer who'd been homeless for 2 years, a brilliant systems architect who'd been rejected from every major tech company because of her criminal record from a decade ago, a non-binary developer who'd faced discrimination at every progressive startup they'd worked for. TechForward wasn't just building software. They were building a movement. Word spread. Not through traditional tech channels, but through communities that had been left behind. Social media posts about a tech company that actually meant it when they said diversity. Blog articles about an alternative to the homogeneous tech world. Local news stories about a Southside company creating opportunities. And that's when Richard Brennan noticed. Marcus was at the office. They'd finally scraped together enough for a small rental space, when the email came through. From richard.brennan@innovatech.com. Subject: Business opportunity. "Marcus, I came across your company, TechForward, through a colleague. Impressive what you've built in such a short time. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership. Innovatech is looking to expand our diversity initiatives, and I think there could be synergies between our organizations. Would you be available for coffee this week? Best, Richard Brennan, VP of Engineering, Innovatech Solutions. Marcus stared at the email for a full minute. Then he read it again. Then he called Devin into his office. "You've got to be kidding me," Devin said after reading it. "This is the guy who basically called you unprofessional and threatened to call security?" "The same. And now he wants to partner with you?" "Apparently diversity initiatives are trending." Devin shook his head. "So what are you going to do?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking. The smart business move would be to take the meeting. Innovatech had resources, connections, clients. A partnership could accelerate TechForward's growth exponentially. But some things mattered more than growth. "I'm going to meet with him," Marcus said slowly. "But not for the reason he thinks." 3 days later, Marcus walked into the same downtown coffee shop where Richard had suggested they meet. He arrived exactly on time, not early, not late. He wore jeans and a TechForward hoodie. No suit this time. No code switching. Just himself. Richard was already there, at a corner table, 2 coffees waiting. He stood when Marcus approached, hand extended, smile wide. "Marcus, good to see you. Thanks for making time." Marcus shook his hand but didn't return the smile. "Richard." They sat. Richard launched immediately into his pitch. Innovatech was committed to improving diversity. They'd set ambitious hiring goals. They'd realized that partnering with companies like TechForward could help them access diverse talent pools. It would be mutually beneficial. A win-win. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Richard finally paused, waiting for a response, Marcus took a sip of the coffee he hadn't asked for. "Do you remember me?" Marcus asked quietly. Richard blinked. "Of course. That's why I reached out." "No. I mean, do you actually remember me? The interview? What you said?" Something flickered across Richard's face. Discomfort, maybe. Or calculation. "That was, what, a year ago? Obviously we have different needs now. The company's evolved." "You told me I didn't fit your image," Marcus said, his voice steady but hard. "You said your clients needed to relate to your team members. You questioned my understanding of professional standards. And when I called you out on it, you threatened to call security on me." Richard shifted in his seat. "I think you're misremembering the conversation. We simply felt you weren't the right fit for that particular role. Because I'm black." The word hung between them. Richard's jaw tightened. "That's not fair," he said. "We have diversity initiatives now. We've hired several diverse candidates." "Several," Marcus repeated. "Out of how many employees? 50? 100? We're making progress." "You're making PR moves," Marcus interrupted. "You're reaching out to me now because TechForward is getting attention. Because we're trending on LinkedIn and getting written up in tech blogs. Because partnering with us would look good in your diversity report. Not because you've had some moral awakening about the way you treat people who don't look like you." Richard's friendly demeanor cracked. "Look, I came here in good faith to discuss a business opportunity. If you're going to hold a grudge over one interview." "One interview," Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think that was one isolated incident? That was my life. That is still the life of every black and brown person trying to break into this industry. We're told we're not professional enough, not polished enough, not the right cultural fit. And then when we build our own companies, suddenly you want to partner with us? Suddenly we're valuable?" "The tech industry is changing," Richard insisted. "We're all learning." "No," Marcus cut him off. "You're not learning. You're adapting to market pressure. There's a difference. You don't actually believe diverse teams are better. You don't actually care about the people you excluded. You just care about the optics." Richard stood up, his face flushed. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by..." He stopped himself, but they both heard the end of that sentence. "By what?" Marcus stood too, meeting his eyes. "By someone like me? By someone you didn't hire because I didn't fit your image." Around them, other coffee shop patrons had gone quiet, watching. "You had a chance to do the right thing a year ago," Marcus continued, his voice calm but cutting. "You had a chance to judge me on my skills, my qualifications, my potential. Instead, you judged me on your prejudices and your fear of what your conservative clients might think. And now you want me to help you look progressive? To give you access to the communities you've excluded so you can check some diversity boxes. We could help each other," Richard tried one more time. "I don't need your help," Marcus said. And I'm not going to be your token black partner so you can tell your board you've solved diversity. TechForward exists because of people like you, not for people like you. We're not interested in being absorbed into systems that never wanted us. We're building something different. Richard grabbed his coat. You're making a mistake. Innovatech has resources, connections. And TechForward has integrity, Marcus said. We'll take our chances. Richard left without another word, the door chiming sharply behind him. Marcus sat back down, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. But underneath the anger and confrontation, there was something else. Clarity. The kind that comes from standing your ground. His phone buzzed. A text from Devin. How'd it go? Marcus smiled and typed back. Perfect. The meeting with Richard could have been the end of the story. Marcus had made his point, stood his ground, sent a clear message. But rejecting Innovatech as partnership turned out to be the best marketing TechForward never planned. Ahmad, their marketing genius, had been at the coffee shop, not by accident. He'd been at a nearby table with his laptop, and he'd live-tweeted the entire confrontation. Not word for word, but the essence of it. A founder standing up to the company that had discriminated against him, choosing principles over profit, rejecting hollow diversity initiatives. The tweets went viral within hours. Tech Twitter exploded. People shared their own stories of discrimination disguised as cultural fit concerns. Threads about performative diversity versus actual inclusion trended for days. News outlets picked up the story. TechForward's website crashed from traffic. But more importantly, clients started calling. Real clients, not just neighborhood businesses, but mid-sized companies tired of the same old tech solutions from the same old tech companies. Organizations that actually valued diverse perspectives, not as a PR move, but because they understood that different experiences led to better innovation. Within 3 months, TechForward had to hire 10 more developers. Within 6 months, they'd secured their first major venture capital investment, from a black-owned fund that believed in their mission. Within a year, they had 50 employees and were profitable. And every single person they hired had a story. A rejection story. A you're not what we're looking for story. A you don't fit our culture story. TechForward became known not just for great software but for great people. Their team was black, white, Latino, Asian, indigenous. They had developers who'd learned to code in prison, designers who'd never set foot in an art school, project managers who'd worked their way up from customer service. They had single parents, first-generation immigrants, people who'd overcome addiction, people who'd been told they'd never amount to anything. And they were phenomenal. The media attention caught the eye of Innovatech's board of directors. 6 months after the coffee shop meeting, Richard Brennan was quietly asked to step down from his position. The official reason was restructuring, but the tech community knew better. The company that had built its reputation on innovation couldn't afford to be seen as stuck in the past. Marcus didn't gloat when he heard the news. He felt no satisfaction in Richard's downfall. That wasn't what this had been about. But there was a sweet moment when TechForward was invited to pitch for a major project with a Fortune 500 financial company, the exact kind of conservative corporate client Richard had said would never be able to relate to Marcus. The presentation was in a gleaming conference room not unlike the one where Marcus had been rejected. But this time he walked in as CEO of a successful company, with Jasmine as his CTO and Devin as his COO. They wore what they always wore, hoodies, jeans, their authentic selves. The clients loved them. Not despite their differences but because of them. TechForward won the contract. 2 years after that disastrous interview at Innovatech, TechForward threw a company anniversary party. They'd grown to 75 employees, opened a second office, and landed partnerships with 3 Fortune 500 companies. The party was at a renovated warehouse on the south side, not far from where Marcus had grown up. String lights hung from the ceiling, music played, and people who'd been told they didn't belong anywhere were celebrating belonging somewhere together. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his team laugh and dance and be themselves without apology. Jasmine was showing off designs on her tablet to a group of junior developers. Ahmad was probably live-tweeting the party. Devin was talking to their newest hire, a brilliant kid from the west side who reminded Marcus of himself at that age, hungry, talented, and tired of being underestimated. His mother appeared at his elbow, elegant in a dress she'd saved for months to buy, pride radiating from every pore. "You did good, baby," she said, squeezing his arm. "Real good." "We did good," Marcus corrected. "None of this happens without you working 2 jobs so I could dream." She smiled, that smile that had gotten them both through the hardest years. "That interview that broke your heart? Best thing that ever happened to you." Marcus laughed. I don't know if I'd go that far. I would, she said firmly, because it made you build something that mattered. Not just another tech company, but a place where people can breathe, where they can be who they are and still be excellent. Across the room, Marcus spotted someone new, a young woman who'd started just last week, fresh out of college, brilliantly talented, and visibly nervous at her first company event. He recognized that nervousness. He'd felt it at every professional event he'd attended before TechForward, that constant awareness of being different, of not quite fitting. He walked over to her. "Hey, Keisha, right? How's your first week going?" She smiled, relieved to be acknowledged. "It's great. Honestly, I almost can't believe I work here. At my last interview, before this one, they told me I wouldn't be comfortable in their work environment. I was starting to think maybe they were right, maybe I just didn't belong in tech." Marcus felt that familiar ache, the one that came from recognizing his own pain in someone else's story. "You belong here," he said simply. "Not because we're doing you a favor, but because you earned it. Your skills, your perspective, your potential, that's what belongs here. And if any other company was too short-sighted to see that, that's their loss." Her eyes got a little watery. "Thank you. You don't know what it means to hear that." But he did know. He knew exactly what it meant to be told you belonged after being told you didn't. He knew the weight that lifted, the breath that came easier, the dream that became possible again. That was the real victory. Not the success of TechForward, not the clients or the revenue or even rejecting Richard's partnership. The real victory was every person in this room who'd been told no and who was now thriving, creating, building something better. Late that night, after the party had ended and the warehouse was empty except for the cleaning crew, Marcus sat in his car in the parking lot, looking at the building that housed the company he'd built from rejection and rage and hope. His phone buzzed. An email from a college student in Atlanta who'd read about TechForward. "I'm a sophomore in computer science, and I just had an interview where they told me I wasn't polished enough for their internship program. I was about to give up, but then I read your story. Thank you for showing me that there's another way. Thank you for building something for people like me." People like me. Marcus thought about those words, about how they'd been weaponized against him in that Innovatech conference room, used to exclude and diminish, and how he'd reclaimed them, transformed them into something powerful. Not a reason to exclude, but a reason to include. Not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be celebrated. The truth was, discrimination in tech, in all industries, wasn't solved. TechForward wasn't some magic solution that fixed systemic racism and bias. Marcus still dealt with investors who underestimated him, clients who were surprised by his competence, moments where he had to prove himself twice as much for half the recognition. But he'd created a space where brilliance wasn't defined by conformity, where professional didn't mean assimilation, where talent was recognized regardless of where it came from or what it looked like. And that space was expanding. Other companies, inspired by TechForward's model, were starting to think differently about hiring. Not just diversity quotas, but genuine inclusion. Not just tolerating difference, but valuing it. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until every Marcus Thompson out there could walk into any interview and be judged solely on their merit. But it was something. It was a start. Marcus started his car and drove home through the Chicago night, past the neighborhood where he'd grown up, past the library where he'd taught himself to code, past the university where he'd dreamed of a career in tech, past the gleaming downtown towers where he'd been told he didn't belong. He thought about the question he'd posed at the beginning. What would you do if the door to your dreams slammed shut in your face? He'd found his answer. You build your own door. And then you hold it open for everyone who's been locked out. His phone rang. Devin. "Yo, did you see the email from that startup accelerator in San Francisco? They want us to mentor their next cohort, specifically to help founders from underrepresented backgrounds." Marcus smiled. "Send me the details. We'll make it work." "Man, remember when we were 4 people in your tiny apartment, eating ramen and wondering if we were crazy?" "We were crazy," Marcus said. "But we were right too." After they hung up, Marcus thought about Richard Brennan. He wondered if the man ever thought about that interview, about the talented developer he'd dismissed because of prejudice disguised as professional standards. He wondered if Richard had learned anything, or if he'd just moved on to another company where he could make the same mistakes with a different title. But ultimately, Richard's growth, or lack thereof, wasn't Marcus's responsibility. He'd wasted enough energy on anger. Now his energy went toward building, creating, opening doors. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the TechForward office early. On his desk was a framed quote that Devin had given him on their first anniversary. It was from James Baldwin, Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Marcus had faced the truth of discrimination in tech. He'd called it out when others stayed silent. He'd refused to accept cultural fit as an excuse for bias. And in facing it, he'd changed something, not everything but something. There was a knock on his door. Keisha, the new hire from the party, stood in the doorway looking nervous but determined. "Hey Marcus, do you have a minute?" "Of course. What's up?" She stepped inside, clutching her laptop. "I had an idea for improving our onboarding process for new developers, especially ones who come from non-traditional backgrounds or who might feel intimidated in corporate environments. I created a prototype of a mentorship matching system with check-ins and resources and..." She stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Sorry, is this overstepping? I've only been here a week." Marcus gestured for her to sit down. "Are you kidding? This is exactly the kind of initiative we need. Show me what you've got." As Keisha opened her laptop and launched into her presentation, passionate, brilliant, unafraid, Marcus saw himself in her. Not the version of himself that had walked into Innovatech nervous and desperate to be accepted, but the version that had emerged on the other side of rejection. Confident, purposeful, building something that mattered. This was the ripple effect. Keisha had been inspired by his story, and now she was creating solutions that would inspire others. The young woman who'd almost given up on tech was now innovating ways to make it more accessible. That was the real power of representation, of creating spaces where people could be their full selves. "This is excellent," Marcus said when she finished. "Let's present it to the team next week. And Keisha, don't ever apologize for having ideas. That's why you're here." She left his office walking taller, and Marcus returned to his computer. He had emails to answer, code to review, a company to run. But he took a moment to respond to that college student in Atlanta, the one who'd been told he wasn't polished enough. "Don't give up," Marcus wrote. "Your brilliance doesn't need their permission to exist. And if they can't see your value, build something so undeniable they can't ignore it. The industry needs what you have to offer, even if some companies are too limited to realize it yet. Keep coding. Keep dreaming. Keep being exactly who you are. People like us? We're not the problem. We're the future." He hit send and opened the next email. A request from a tech conference asking him to speak on a panel about diversity in hiring. A message from a venture capital firm interested in TechForward's expansion plans. An invitation to mentor at a coding boot camp for formerly incarcerated individuals. Every opportunity was a chance to open another door, to create another path, to tell another person who'd been dismissed and underestimated, "You belong here." Marcus thought about the statistics he'd researched when starting TechForward. Black professionals made up less than 7% of workers in big tech companies. Latino workers were around 8%. The numbers were even worse at the executive level. And it wasn't for lack of talent or qualification. It was systemic barriers dressed up as cultural fit and professional standards. But those numbers were changing slowly but surely. Companies like TechForward were proving that diverse teams weren't just good for optics. They were good for business, good for innovation, good for solving complex problems in creative ways. Every black kid who learned to code, every brown student who graduated with a computer science degree, every person from a wrong neighborhood or wrong background who broke into tech, they were all dismantling the myth that excellence looked one way. And maybe, Marcus thought, that was the ultimate reversal. Not just building a successful company, but changing the definition of what success looked like. Not just creating opportunities, but transforming an entire industry's understanding of who belonged in it. His mother called right before lunch. "Baby, I'm watching you on the news. Channel 7 is doing a story about TechForward." Marcus pulled up the live stream on his computer. There was footage of their office, interviews with employees talking about what it meant to work somewhere that valued their authentic selves. The reporter called TechForward a model for the future of inclusive tech. But what struck Marcus most was a quote from one of their developers, a young black woman named Aisha who'd been rejected from 12 other companies before TechForward hired her. "I used to think I had to make myself smaller to fit into tech spaces. I had to code switch, dim my personality, hide parts of my identity. But here, I can be all of who I am and still be excellent. Actually, I'm excellent because of who I am, not in spite of it. That's revolutionary. That's revolutionary." Yes, Marcus thought. It was. Not because they were doing anything radical or extreme, but because basic dignity and inclusion shouldn't be revolutionary, yet in tech, it still was. His phone buzzed with a text from Ahmad. "Bro, we're trending again. Hashtag TechForward is number 3 on Twitter." This is wild. It was wild. But it was also necessary. Every story shared, every tweet sent, every article written, it all contributed to a larger narrative shift. From diverse candidates aren't qualified to qualified candidates are being overlooked. From culture fit to culture add. From gatekeeping to gate opening. That evening, Marcus attended a community event at the library where he'd first taught himself to code. They'd invited him to speak to local kids about careers in technology. The audience was mostly black and brown faces, kids from neighborhoods like the one he'd grown up in, kids who'd been told, subtly or overtly, that tech wasn't for them. How many of you like computers? Marcus asked. Most hands went up. How many of you think you could have a career in tech? Fewer hands. Why not? Marcus pressed gently. A girl in the front row, maybe 13, raised her hand. Because people who look like us don't usually work in those jobs. We don't see ourselves in those spaces. The honesty gutted him. At 13, she'd already internalized the message that tech wasn't for her. You're right, Marcus said. Representation matters. It's hard to dream about a career you've never seen someone who looks like you succeed in. But that's changing. And more importantly, you all have the power to change it even more. He told them his story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The rejection, the discrimination, the moment he almost gave up. And then the decision to build something different. They told me people like me don't belong in tech, Marcus said. And you know what? They were wrong. Not because I'm exceptional, though I'd like to think I'm pretty good at what I do, but because people like me was never a real category. It was an excuse. A way to maintain the status quo. And the status quo, it's changing. By the time he finished speaking, the girl in the front row had a different look in her eyes. Not certainty maybe, but possibility. After the event, a line of kids and parents waited to talk to him. They had questions about coding boot camps, scholarships, career paths. But mostly they just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for showing them it was possible. Thank you for being visible. Thank you for not giving up. Marcus drove home that night exhausted but fulfilled. This was the work that mattered. Not just running a company, but changing what was imaginable for the next generation. When he got home, he found an unexpected package waiting at his door. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Marcus, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our coffee meeting. You were right. I was making excuses for biases I didn't want to acknowledge. I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to do better. I've started working with a consultant on implicit bias. I've pushed for policy changes at my new company. It's not enough, but it's a start. You didn't owe me grace, but I hope someday to earn a different conversation. Richard. Marcus read the note twice. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was acknowledgement. Growth. The beginning of understanding. He didn't owe Richard forgiveness. He didn't owe him anything. But he felt something shift nonetheless. Not anger or bitterness, but a kind of tired hope that maybe, slowly, people could learn. People could change. He texted Devin. Richard sent a note. Says he's working on doing better. Think he means it? Don't know. Don't really care. But I'll take systemic change however it comes. Fair enough. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate another successful week of proving them all wrong. Sounds perfect. Marcus set the note aside and opened his laptop one last time. There was an email from a venture capital firm, not the usual kind, but a new fund specifically for minority-owned tech companies. They wanted to feature TechForward in their portfolio as an example of successful scaling with intentional inclusion. He started typing a response, then paused. Through his apartment window, he could see the Chicago skyline, all those towers full of companies that had told people like him they didn't belong. But here he was, building, thriving, opening doors. They told him, we don't hire people like you. So he'd built a company for people like him. And in doing so, he'd proven that people like him weren't the ones who didn't fit. It was the system that was wrong all along. Marcus smiled and continued typing his response. There was work to do, doors to open, dreams to make possible. And he was just getting started.